passage from Matthew's Gospel of today is really a commentary on the rejection of the rich young man who wished to follow Jesus. But because of his wealth, he was unable to do so. So this takes the form of a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples. In the first part of the Gospel, we see that Jesus uses a simile or a comparison of a camel passing through the eye of a needle. And secondly, he engages Peter in a very tender way when Peter raises the question about what reward the disciples are going to receive. So it's obvious that in the Gospel of yesterday, the young man was captivated by Jesus, but he was unable to take the next step because of his wealth. He was unable to share. He was unable to think of others. So Jesus then is saying the opposite to what was the religious belief of the Jews at the time, of the understanding of what religious thought meant at that time. First of all, wealth was a sign of God's blessing. So Jesus now is saying that if you want to be rich, from the point of view of following Jesus, you must share what you have with those who have not. And I suppose that is the great challenge for all of us. That's where it hurts, that's where it challenges us. And when we do share wealth, or whatever we have for the good of others, everybody benefits. And if there was such a mentality in the world that we live in, or in the countries that we come from, our countries would be very, very different. The world we live in would be very, very different if it followed the gospel values. We're all aware, or we know how difficult it is to share, because wealth has the opposite effect on people. It tends to make people very selfish. And the more people have, the more they want for themselves. There is a false independence also, and somehow God is pushed aside as well. And I think all of us are aware of that in our own personal lives, in our own very small ways. We don't need to have wealth in order to be able to share, in order to think of others or to put others first. And then secondly, in the reply of Jesus to Peter, in saying that if you work to bring about the kingdom of God, then you will be rewarded by sharing in his glory. So if we work for bringing about that new kingdom which Jesus has instituted, then we will share in his glory. And through this new relationship with Christ, you will bring about the kingdom values, which are very often at odds with the values of the world that we live in. And they're very often, I say, opposing forces in the world that we live in. And perhaps the person we are remembering today, that is Bernard of Clairvaux, he somehow tried to do that in his own lifetime. As you know, Bernard was born in France in 1090, and he entered the Cistercian order, which is really a more stricter version of the Benedictine order. And he entered that when he was 22. And I suppose you could say that Bernard was a force of nature. He brought 30 companions with him. So you can imagine 30 people joining a community, and maybe members of his own family as well. But again, he brought about great change, and he worked to bring about that new kingdom and the kingdom values which are spoken of in today's gospel. He had a big influence on the church at that time, I say in the 11th century and the 12th century. And I say the influence of Bernard and the Cistercian order spread throughout Europe during his reign. And he was also very sought after for his advice and wisdom by the church at that time. As you know, in the church in every age, it has its own problems. We very often think that we have only the problems now, which are, I suppose, besetting the church at this time. But they're always there, and they will be always there, because it's made up of men and women who are, all of us, including, we're all flawed somehow, and we're all going to make mistakes. He was also a man, I suppose, of great wisdom, of great holiness, and he wrote widely as well on theology and spirituality. And I suppose one of his great masterpieces is that of which he wrote, and is still unfinished, on the Song of Songs. And as you know, he was canonized by the church in 1174, and he was made a doctor of the church in 1830. So we owe much to him, I say. And I suppose that's what the saints reveal some aspect of the mystery of God's love in the world. And each and every one of us, through our own characteristics, through our personalities, are also a reflection of God's love in the world and the place where we find ourselves at this present time.